Here's our table ID for October. So first mushroom here is from Douglas Miller. You can see it's white, growing on wood. Looks kind of fuzzy. You guys have probably seen these before. This one's a little different than you may have seen. There's a lion's mane, which is called the pom-pom, and it looks more like a pom-pom that you'd see a cheerleader shaking around. This one's a little bit more branched and kind of reaching out. And there's a couple of different types. One has relatively long spines. This one has a little bit shorter spines. I believe they say that one has more spines hanging from the branches as well, but I think the length of the spine is going to help clear it up. Hericium, which is what this is a Hericium coralloides. They are edible and probably quite tasty, and probably one of the easier mushrooms, in my opinion, to learn to identify. Nothing really looks like this growing on wood. You might see some corals or something, but once you learn this, you kind of know what you got there. And they're pretty tasty. All right, so the next one's submitted by Estella Wildman. She found these in her yard. She did say that there were some conifers nearby. You can see this one looks kind of slimy and glutinous, which is a bit indicative. It's just another one of those identifying features that you can look for. Kind of puts ideas in your mind immediately. And then once you flip this thing over, you'll see, oh, wait, this thing has pores. It doesn't have gills. So this must be one of those boletes. It's got a cap and a stem, growing terrestrial, meaning grown from the ground. And instead of something like reticulation, which is that web style pattern that grows on the stipe, it's got these little glandular dots. Now this one isn't as flush with the dots as you usually see, but I still think this might be Pseuilus granulatus, considering the color of the cap and just the general stature and everything. Over time, sometimes these little dots will start darkening in age, and it may look like there's more, even though that they're still there. Pseuilus are good edible. Some people recommend peeling that slimy cap off, the cap cuticle, which is kind of like a skin and comes off fairly easily. So anyway, that's Pseuilus granulatus. All right, so here's one, and I am welcome to taking some recommendations about this because this is an amanita. If you're not sure what amanitas are, they tend to have a universal veil that breaks up on the top of the cap. That's what these little spots are here. That's covering the entire mushroom before it expands and grows. Usually it leaves either like a bulbous sac or sometimes some remnants down here. We don't really see many though. Another odd thing, which I had ideas in my head when I saw just the cap of this, like, okay, that's an amanita. She had also sent a different picture that had much spinier warts on the cap. So I thought, oh, maybe that's an Amanita pantherina. But Amanita pantherina and many other amanitas have what's called a partial veil, which would be on the ring, on the stem here, and it would leave this ring. It would be, before the cap opens, it would be covering these gills and protecting them before the spores mature. There are a few type of amanitas that do not have this ring, but in this case, I have no clue. There's an Amanita Cecilia that has grayish coloration to the warts, and usually there's kind of a gray ring around the bottom here from the remnants of the universal veil, but it also has a ring. And if I was to zoom in on this, it also looks like it may have serrated gills, which I think I've found this before, but I don't know exactly what to name this. I do know it's an Amanita. It's very interesting. And if anybody has any suggestions, feel free to speak out. All right, so another from Estella. This is similar to something we've been seeing a lot. I think every one of our table IDs, we've had one of these kind of orangey, red, yellow colored amanitas with a yellow stipe. But typically, it didn't have any ring on it or partial veil. And if you look at this stem here, there isn't a partial veil, but if you look at the edge of the cap here, you'll see that the partial veil has stayed attached to the edge of the cap. So actually this did have a ring, it just ended up sticking to the edge of the cap. So that is gonna lead us to a different mushroom. This is most likely something like Amanita flavoconia, which can look very similar. The warts on the cap, which looks like a lot have been rubbed off, there were a few up here, tend to be more of a yellow coloration. And if we were to see the base, a lot of times there will be remnants from the universal veil at the bottom near the substrate. All right, here's a mushroom submitted by Grace Chi. I believe this was just in a yard. Pretty nondescript, big brown thing. One thing is it has a kind of mosaic splitting pattern on the cap. So there's a couple of things that this could be. And as you can see here where she's cut it open, it's all pure white inside. This is one of the larger puffballs. It doesn't have gills, doesn't have pores, doesn't have teeth. It has what they call a gleba, which is the spores before they mature. And as they mature, they're gonna start changing color. And if you were to see this color changing here, because puffballs are an edible species, if that color change begins, you're not going to want to mess with them. It's gotten too old. There are a couple that are this large. A lot of times it's best to know what color that gleba turns as it matures. But I think that this is actually Calvacia cyathiformis, which means, and so it would probably have the purplish colored spore mass. And I only say that because of this weird mosaic kind of pattern on the cap. Although I believe craniformis, which is kind of like the skull-shaped puffball, they can look very similar. Okay, this is a very cool one. I've never found this in this area. It looks a little nondescript, kind of like, okay, what's this, brown capped weird mushroom growing? This was submitted by Jennifer Hoyer. She found this in Fairfax. And when you look closer to the side, this sucker does not have gills. It has like this wavy cross-veining hymenium, like where the spores are produced, which is similar to something like a chanterelle. Well, this actually is, or is in kind of the group that contains the chanterelles. This is Gomphus clavatus. They call this pig's ears. I don't know if any others have found this. It kind of has a lilac color to its flesh. A lot of times down by the base, by the stem, is kind of lilac colored as well. Anyway, this seems unusual to me, but I've never found it. And she said it was kind of growing in almost a fairy ring around like an oak tree or something like that. Pretty cool though, neat to see. We've had a pretty good year so far, having interesting mushrooms coming up. All right, so this one's submitted by Tom McCoy. You can see that he's cut into the ground here. And so what we have up here looks kind of like one of either the earth tongues or some sort of club fungi. The earth tongues tend to have more of a defined cap. A lot of times there'll be more of a groove here. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you might have put it in something like that, like an earth tongue or something. And once you pull it up, you'd probably start seeing a bit of a yellow coloration towards the base, whereas the earth tongues would remain all pretty much black towards the base. And he's dug this up because this little thing down here is actually a false truffle, kind of like an underground puffball. So you can see here, he's dug them up, and you do have this yellow base down here. And it's actually attached, it's parasitic on this little, what's called an Elaphomyces, which is kind of like a false truffle. It's probably Elaphomyces granulatus. And I've kind of zoomed into this Elaphomyces here. It almost looks like a thick-skinned scleroderma that you might find growing either in your yard or in the woods. So this is actually Talipocladium ophioglyphoides, otherwise known as the golden thread cordyceps, which is probably way easier to say. And that is due to the mycelium, the rhizomorphs kind of growing and attaching to this Elaphomyces false truffle. Cool find. And something that you might not think, oh, I should dig that up. You know, it's like, oh, let me just pluck it. Well, sometimes you got to think about what you got there. And if you know that there might be those, take a little closer look and maybe dig a little bit and see how deep it goes into the earth. Okay, so here's something that I think a lot of people might have been seeing lately. I know we saw some similar mushrooms that look like it. So this is submitted by Tim Childress. Kind of yellowy mushrooms growing at the base of a tree. You can see it's kind of scaly in the center, little denser scales in the middle. And looking on the underside, you see this ring on the stem. Well, we had similar mushrooms up, and there's still some up right now, but the ringless honeys were up in abundance not too long ago. And we had a few of those in table ID and in the foray meetings. But this one has a ring. It's got this honey-colored cap. I'm going to call this one Armillaria mellia. There's a lot of different armillarias, and they're all considered honey mushrooms, and they are edible. Whoops, skipping ahead, trying to move this camera. So anyway, that's the honeys that are coming up, and right now, Elizabeth was saying that they've found something that's associated with these, and that's the aborted entoloma, which tend to parasitize these, and they grow these white pincushiony looking things. And sometimes you'll see these mushrooms right next to them with those weird little pincushion things, and sometimes you'll see the actual entoloma mushrooms as well. And they're all edible. Of course, entolomas you got to be careful with. You got to know that if you see them growing with these, then you're okay. But you got to know what you're looking for. But certainly the honey mushrooms and the aborted forms can be fairly tasty. You do want to cook these well if you do find them and want to pot hunt them, because they can upset your stomach. All right, so we've seen a few things like this in the past, something like stinky squid or something like this. This is also by Tom Childress. This was the only photo he sent. Actually, he had a different view, but I just decided to use this one. So you can see this kind of greenish goo on here. Got this relatively smooth running surface. It's kind of hard to see, it's a little washed out, but there would be a kind of vulva sac, similar to what you'd see in an amanita. These kind of grow from an egg, or at least what looks like an egg, and they erupt from it, and they normally would have this green goo up towards the surface, mostly towards the apex, towards the top of the mushroom here. And it is foul. It stinks pretty bad, and it attracts flies, and that's what they land, fly off, and spread the spores to different areas. So this is a stinkhorn. This is Mutinus elegans, and there's a few different types of stinkhorns. We've seen stinky squid, and this one was submitted by Ray LaSala. This is another form, and you see this kind of has more of an expanded area near the apex. I'm not too sure exactly which one this is, because there's some that can kind of look like each other. And this is another reason why having stuff right there with you is a little better than just trying to ID stuff with pictures. So there's a couple of different stinkhorns that this could be. It's possible that it's Mutinus caninus, which is very similar to the one we were just looking at, elegans, except it has a little swollen top near the top where the gleba is present. There's also another one, Phallus rubicundus, which might be, but that one actually has more of a cap hanging from the top, like a skirt. But sometimes over time, it'll start joining with the cap. So if we had a stick or something, we could push that and see if that's actually the surface of the mushroom underneath there, or if it's actually hanging off a little skirt. And then we would be able to tell what this actually was. Spores distributed the same way. Flies landing on it, flying off. All right, another little white thing grown in the grass, submitted by Jim Ball. He found this, of course, in the grassy area, as you see there. And I think we had this one at the foray, the last foray as well. You can see it's got these brown gills. You've got the remnants of a partial veil that was protecting the gills before they started maturing. He even took a spore print and threw a piece of chocolate in there, because we always say agaricus have a chocolate colored spore print. He said this is dark chocolate, so maybe we should start saying it's actually a milk chocolate spore print. Anyway, this is most likely agaricus campestris, which is also inedible, but you have to be careful with the agaricus. Sometimes if they stain yellow or if they smell kind of chemically, they can also upset your stomach. And you always got to see those chocolate colored gills, because you may know there are some white mushrooms, Amanita virosa, as William had in the first slide there. And that one's going to have pure white, pretty much everything, but that one can kill you if you eat it. Anyway, that is all we got today. Thanks for everyone who participated. You look in your email and you'll see something about how to submit mushrooms for the table ID. And remember that we're going to be getting cold and the mushrooms are going to start getting a little sparse. We got a Mycena leyana there. We've got some black chanterelles and some golden chanterelles. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mitch. Are you planning any other forays for the year?
Yeah, I'll probably send out a notification tomorrow for a foray that will be held probably maybe Thursday. So basically a week from today. So that'll give you a week to have a time to go out in the woods, you know, get some photos and submit them, and I'll put it together, and we'll sit for an hour or so and talk about what we think they are.
Yeah, if you haven't done one, you have to think about it. It's a really good interactive for people trying to learn mushrooms. Were there any questions, Elizabeth, for Mitch?
Yeah. Have you heard any reports of hen of the woods yet?
I had only one person send me a hen. I'm surprised. I thought I'd be seeing hens coming through. But yes, one person sent me a hen. They said it was like 10 pounds or something, and they're still eating.
There's a lot of hen up. Yeah.
Even I found one, and I never found one before.
All right, so hens are up, I guess.